Hey everyone, and welcome back to another game industry report, one that I think you might find a bit surprising. You see, acquisitions are a big part of gaming, especially recently, right? A massive company busily building up a massive gaming empire with dozens of studios, hundreds of IPs, and thousands of staff, steadily spreading their influence to where they can effectively dominate an entire market segment, and of course, showing no sign of slowing down. Now, you might have heard that, and you might be thinking of a few studios, right? Well, what if I told you that I'm not talking about Microsoft, that I'm not talking about Tencent? Yes, Tencent, maybe you will get all the press for acquiring studios and investing in things, but it is in fact Embracer Group that have been hoovering up studios in the background without the vast majority of people noticing, really without that much mainstream attention. So, who are this mysterious Embracer Group, and what is their deal? I'll tell you what, I've got a deal for you. It's October, and that means that it's a new month of merch on our Patreon. The art bundle is nice and spooky, and it's also Rogue Month, so you will get the Rogue class pin in your mail as well. And by the way, if you like seeing how stuff is made, this is what a mid-production enamel pin looks like. Right now, it hasn't been punched, it hasn't been plated in silver-colored nickel, and it hasn't been polished, but that's kind of what they look like raw when they come out of the oven. Yeah, it's kind of cool to see. Patrons, your help is of course invaluable. We've got many things planned, many more game-specific videos on the way too, so thank you, the audience thanks you, and with that said, let's get down to the content. So, what does Embracer own? Well, they own a lot. I'm just going to rattle off some numbers, you might be surprised. Over 190 IPs. 6 operative groups running a total of 44 development studios. That's over 4,000 employees across 40 plus countries. And those 6 operative groups are serving as direct subsidiaries, and they're probably what you might have heard of. You know, Saber Interactive, THQ Nordic, Koch Media's Deep Silver, they're all big enough names in publishing. There's then Amplifier Game Investing, Coffee Stain Holdings, and DECA Games. Now, 44 dev studios between all of these, that may seem like a lot, and some of them are renowned for great work. You've got Tarsier Studios, you've got Volition, that's Saints Row, you've got Piranha Bytes, 4A Games, that's the Metro series, and Warhorse Studios, which is of course Kingdom Come Deliverance. And they owned 163 IPs as of March. Now, as of the time of publication, that's over 190, right, following a recent spate of acquisitions. And, you know, it's smaller but beloved IPs rather than massive names. I mean, you'll have heard of these, right? Darksiders, Time Splitters, Metro, Kingdoms of Amalur, Saints Row, Goat Simulator. That's only a small portion, of course. Now, Embracer, you know, they don't own massive IP, but they have this kind of mid-range IP with very dedicated fan bases that they just have so much of. They have hoovered it up. They have a massive amount of influence to the point where they really can dominate what we're going to call the AA market. Perhaps surprisingly, Embracer Group don't really talk a whole lot about their ambitions or their intentions. They kinda just get on with it. They've had huge expansion. They had just over 2,000 staff as of December 2019. Now that was a 52% increase over the same quarter in the previous year, but now they're at over 4,000. I mean, look at this, right? They had a paltry 24 studios in February. It's now 44. This is all, like, that's still within 2020. That's insane. At the start of this year, they had 118 games in development. 69 were unannounced. Nice. And of course, it's definitely more now. They added 8 more studios in August alone. I mean, this is so much expansion and acquisition. And hey, not to give you set whiplash, but I'm here with a quick little addendum for you because right after we recorded this video, guess what happened? Embracer Group raised $500 million, and guess what it's for? It's for even more acquisitions. So yes, that basically means that everything we're saying in today's video is even more important and even more backed up, because now it is super clear that this is their plan. And it's not just Embracer expanding directly. Their subsidiaries are, of course, going to town. So you've got Koch Media. They are entering VR with the acquisition of Vertigo Games last month, while Saber brought up 4A Games and New World Interactive. And they're not close to done yet. They actually discussed further acquisitions in May. I mean, a pertinent quote is this: "The appetite amongst gaming entrepreneurs for joining forces is solid and growing." And that just says exactly what they want to do. Embracer hang out primarily in the mid-range AA sphere, and that's where they're really putting a lot of effort into expanding their influence. And really their strategy is targeting underserved niches and basically dominating them. And that fits in very well with how the Embracer Group CEO got his very impressive start, and that's something we'll talk about soon. Okay, I get how you might be feeling right now. Just numbers, 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 numbers. What does it actually mean for us, though? Well, in short, I'll tell you what it means. It means a lot of games. The breadth of Embracer's portfolio just means that they can put out a massively diverse range of titles. They can also release games consistently throughout the year without observing the typical drought periods of a lot of the bigger companies, right? It's not like EA are putting out a game every single month, for example. Koch Media, Deep Silver, they particularly just always seem to be putting out new stuff. And then moving past them with THQ Nordic, I mean, it's really THQ Nordic that I'd say is their most well-known brand because, of course, of THQ. And that's really where the bulk of Embracer is. Well, if you look at their exciting games portfolio and their annual report, a lot of that is THQ-related stuff. But then also, they're able to control the market via their legacy IPs. And this is a big thing. They're consistently putting out remakes and remasters, and that's something they can keep on doing. And also, you can actually test the market. I mean, a good example is like with Gothic, the Gothic remaster and the way there's like the demo that came out. And if you look at recent examples, right, you've got Destroy All Humans, you've got Darksiders, you've got Saints Row, you've got Metro, Kingdoms of Amalur. They all got remakes and re-releases recently. I believe there's also Battle for Bikini Bottom, of course, the SpongeBob game that's pretty well beloved. Man, that's a lot of IP that they can just tap into. And of course, by tapping into that IP via doing a remaster or re-release, they can actually market test it to see if they want to actually do something, a bit more expensive and a bit more new with that IP. And then, of course, that also means that existing games can come to new platforms like Steam and the Switch, and that means that Embracer can just get a lot of mileage out of the IPs that they've got. Basically, right, they're doing in many ways the opposite of AAA's trend, right? AAA's been very much trending towards a smaller number of games with humongous expectations. Embracer, though, they've just spread out. They have a presence in games basically in every genre that exists, and mostly in that AA range. I mean, they really do cover the widest possible base with, I'd say, less risk than the AAA all-or-nothing games that lots of us would be used to. All right, let's take a break for story time. Who are the Embracer Group? Well, the Embracer Group own a massive portion of the European gaming industry, as we've covered, and it is, of course, getting bigger and bigger, with them being extremely acquisition happy. And this is where I'm going to talk about the CEO and founder, Lars, because that guy is an absolute hustler. He started off selling plastic bags and Christmas magazines, and then he started a second-hand mail-order comic book business when he was 13, and he did that using a customer register that he actually acquired from a defunct mail-order company, so that's pretty impressive. He then established Nordic Games at the age of 16, mailing out second-hand games to people. He then eventually opened retail stores in Sweden, and after some buying, selling, and restructuring, Nordic Games was formed, and lots of success was found by them, basically reselling unsold stock from bigger companies like EA. And then 2011 rolled around, and the ambitions grew. Nordic bought the insolvent Joe Wood Entertainment, and then in 2014, they acquired the THQ trademark and many of THQ's assets in, of course, that very famous bankruptcy sell. And it really is buy low, sell high. I mean, imagine being able to pick up THQ for that much of a bargain. And then, of course, it was in 2016 that THQ Nordic was born, and that's really what you probably will have heard of. And they've been going pretty darn hard since. The whole outfit became formerly known as the Embracer Group in August of last year, and then THQ Nordic was still actually kept, though, but as a subsidiary publisher, which does make complete sense given the name recognition. But of course, what I think happened there is that then Embracer Group was something the public had no idea of, and that's why I think this video will be a surprise to so many people. I mean, If you knew fully the scope of Embracer Group, say down below in the comments, and if you didn't and this is news to you, let me know as well, because I have to imagine this is news to many people. I'm just not sure how many people would have known that Deep Silver and THQ Nordic are all owned by this one quiet group. And it's been a pretty storied history. I mean, when we were looking into the data here, Lars is 43 years old. I mean, that's pretty young as compared to the likes of Bobby Kotick and Strauss Zelnick. That said, Strauss Zelnick is... The shape of that guy is ridiculous for his age, and it's pretty telling that a lot of his, he talks about longevity and fitness and stuff. So, yes, Lars is he's probably got the health of a 30-year-old, but point is, Lars is pretty damn young for a massive game CEO, and he really does seem to be a sort of see a need, fill a need, get paid kind of guy. And for them, gaming has had a lot of that need for Embracer to capitalize on. And there's no story that signifies their whole approach, I think, better than their first move as Nordic Games. So at that point, they were very much aiming to fill gaps in the market before they started purchasing publishers. Now, do you remember SingStar, the PS exclusive karaoke game? Well, they basically saw that that would be a pretty strong fit for the Nintendo audience on the Wii. So Lars and a co-founder took the idea for a competitor title to Nintendo. And it was pretty quickly apparent why nobody had did it, because Nintendo handed them 100 pages of stringent requirements, including specifics and hardware and a whole bunch of stuff, but that didn't stop them. They actually ended up spending 4 months researching at a karaoke bar in Watford, England, and they then assembled a song list for a game that became known as We Sing. And their turnover was $5 million in the year that We Sing was released. 75% of that turnover was from We Sing. They then projected $20 million for the next year, and ultimately, that's what kickstarted their journey. They actually saw an unserved audience in the singing game market, and they served them. So when you think about a mysterious gaming conglomerate, you kind of do think about Tencent, right? And with Embracer, they don't just have expansion ambitions. Their entire ambition is expansion. Tencent, their big IP, right? Their huge AAA studio investments, while Embracer are actually taking a very different approach. They're looking for that beloved, maybe a bit cheaper mid-range IP that's often overlooked by the big boys. And that's what they're really going for. I mean, Tencent, compared to them, they've got far more of a media profile, right? Big investments in Riot and Epic. Also, there's the CCP, their operations, of course, in their home country that obviously paints them in a negative enough light in the eye of many users. Embracer, though, are obviously significantly smaller as a business. Their revenue, right, for the last financial year was $260 million. And that was up 80% over the previous year. I mean, that's incredible growth. But as an example, Activision's market cap is $61 billion. EA's is $37 billion. Embracer's is only $7 billion right now. Now that leaves them basically catching up to Ubisoft's $10 billion. And hey, that's not bad for a group you probably haven't heard of, but it's certainly does mean that while they have many IPs and very impressive numbers here, they are a smaller group. And that's why, in terms of, even though they do have large numbers of games, a lot of influence and many different IPs, they largely do scoot by unnoticed by many players. But ultimately, you could sort of think they're playing with fire. I mean, they do have so many of these beloved franchises. They're risking and maybe stepping in things that people love. If they do anti-consumer things, and it could be a bit rough. If they cancel a project people really care about, there are all of those negative stories that could happen to them. And because they are such a massive group, there's more potential for things to go right, but also more potential for things to go wrong. But then I would say their wins and their losses on a per project basis will be somewhat smoothed and averaged out by just the sheer amount of diversification that there is in their overall business. And I think that is a real strength, because they show no signs of slowing down, and really their goal seems to be to have a massive amount of output in mid to small range projects for things that people are excited about. Take Darksiders. I mean, things like Darksiders Genesis made not really any waves amongst gamers. They reviewed in the high 70s, people kind of forgot about them, but Lars himself said that that game exceeded expectations, so clearly it worked out. And also, from what we understand, Embracer seem to exert minimal control over their studios. Certainly I'd say they have so many studios and games that it would be pretty hard for them to do so, but it is fairly unlike companies like EA or Ubisoft who do exercise a pretty tight hold over their network of studios. Embracer, though, they seem to be happy being a very strategic holdings group, funding studios and taking their share of the profits. And I think as a result, Embracer just operates more in the shadows. You know, they're mysterious, but maybe that's not a bad thing. And I'd also say, rather than have all their eggs in a few baskets, like the Call of Duty basket, they instead just seem to want to have a massive amount of games that people do care about, even if it's not all the people in the world, and to have a diversified portfolio, which, you know what, is a business model that I quite like. So there you go, that was a fun jaunt into business land. I hope we were able to keep it nice and sort of fast-paced for you, because I know these things can get a little bit dull. And it is interesting. I mean, we're in an industry where acquisitions are typically big news, and then you see Embracer Group just skate by under the radar, gobbling up studios. I mean, something like Microsoft's $7.5 billion for Bethesda may indeed dominate headlines, but while that was happening, Embracer Group almost doubled in size since February. Pretty wild that we weren't really talking about it. They've got a wide influence over a lot of IPs that many of us care about, and you know what? I really do. When I look at games, I kind of think there's the big AAAs, but also, man, some of those AA-sized projects, they can be really good. And if there is a big company there that is focusing on creating great games with a reasonable budget and reasonable cost for an audience who loves them, then I gotta say I'd be pretty happy for that. So, we'll have to see where it goes. That is it for the video, though. I hope you have learned something new today. Of course, if you want to support what we're doing and also get some sweet loot from our game development team, then you can check out the Patreon. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.